Welcome into This is Baseball. Welcome to the first Wednesday edition of This is Baseball in a very long time. Just as a reminder, we've changed up our upload schedule. We went back to uploading episodes every Wednesday for the rest of the season. So let's get into the week. It is now August, obviously. I do want to talk a little bit of trade deadline just because I think that while it wasn't, to me, a crazy deadline across the league, there are some moves that I do want to talk about. And I want to open with the Royals because I actually really liked their trade deadline. Now, they didn't go out and make any huge splashes by any means, but they did go out and improve their roster. So just looking at some of the trades they made, about a week before the deadline, they acquired Adam Frazier from the Pittsburgh Pirates for Cam Devaney, went out and got Randall Grichuk from the Arizona Diamondbacks in return for Andrew Hoffman, went out and got Mike Yastrzemski from the San Francisco Giants, Bailey Falter from the Pirates, and a couple of pitchers from the Padres, Ryan Bergert and Steven Kolek. And on paper, you're like, okay, Mike Yastrzemski, Randall Grichuk, Adam Frazier, not all that exciting. But I do think all three of them being veterans helps out tremendously. Adam Frazier is a little bit of a utility player, so you can kind of plug in anywhere. Randall Grichuk and Mike Yastrzemski, both outfielders. And while neither of them, you didn't go and trade for Aaron Judge and Mike Trout by bringing them in, you, I think, bring stability to the outfield just because there have been a lot of questions about the Royals and their outfield. I mean, even last season, coming into this season, we've talked about it a lot on the podcast of opening the season with MJ Melendez and Hunter Renfroe in the corner outfield spots. And Hunter Renfroe obviously DFA'd back in May. MJ Melendez was sent down, I think, either at the end of April or at the beginning of May. He got to come back up for a really short stint while Nick Lofton was on the injured list for a concussion. It was very short-lived, and it was not a productive stay in Kansas City for MJ Melendez. And quite honestly, here's what I think, and it might be a little bit different than what the Royals think. I think MJ Melendez is done in the major leagues, at least as a Kansas City Royal. I think he has proven that he just doesn't have it at the highest level. Now, do we see MJ come back up later in the season? I think if the Royals feel like they do have a shot at the postseason, which, as we're talking today, they're in it. I think if they're serious, MJ Melendez won't be back up here. But if things fall apart over the next 3 weeks, then yeah, you might see him again. But if I had it my way, MJ Melendez would be done, and I don't really know what his trade market is or what his trade value is, but I would be looking at just moving him and being done with it and kind of giving him the Adalberto Mondesi treatment of, hey, you know what? It didn't work out in Kansas City with us, but, you can go to this new organization and we wish you well and honestly hope to see you succeed. And it'd be one of those things where it is what it is if that happened. But yeah, Mike Yastrzemski, Randall Grichuk have already made an impact on the team. Mike Yastrzemski hit a home run in his first AB in Toronto. And like I said, I think the big key because you look at those names and you're like, okay, they're both in their mid-30s. Even Adam Frazier's in his 30s. And just veteran leadership and stability in some positions that have not had that for a while. And Adam Frazier has familiarity with the Royals because he was here last year. Randall Grichuk and the Royals talked in the offseason, and he was almost a Royal. And the big win here with getting these players is you didn't really have to give up much. So you got better and didn't have to part with much value or pieces that you feel like are going to be part of your team. I know the biggest loss is Freddie Fermin. That one kind of stinks because I do think he was a positive for the Royals. I think he's a great defensive catcher, and he came up big a lot of times during his plate appearances and his opportunities. But good for him to go to San Diego and get a chance to be a starter because I do think he's taken a huge step forward this year and shown that he could be a viable starting catcher. And I think going to the Padres is a great spot for him. I think that the Padres actually had one of the best trade deadlines that you could have and are set up as far as acquisitions go for having the most potential success over the next 2 months into the postseason. So the Padres got A's closer Mason Miller and another pitcher, J.P. Sears. They did give up their number 1 prospect and MLB's number 3 prospect. Actually, they gave up 4 top prospects for their team, 2 that are in the top 5, basically to get Mason Miller. They made a trade with the very disappointing Baltimore Orioles team, went out and got Ryan O'Hearn and Ramon Laureano. Ryan O'Hearn was an all-star this year. Again, gave up their number 6 prospect, number 8 prospect, and number 16 prospect. So they're giving up the farm. The Padres are in an effort to win now. They went out and shored up more of their pitching. They got Nestor Cortez. So the Padres got a lot better in basically every element of their roster. And they're only 3 games behind the Dodgers. So it's not like they're making this big push to make sure that they're a wild card team. They have a legitimate shot at being the National League West champions. And the Dodgers and Padres have 6 games left against each other, all in the month of August. So those are going to be very big games. I don't know how the schedule makers didn't give them a matchup with each other in late September, but that is for a different discussion. But let's get back to the American League Central and kind of how that trade deadline went down, because looking at it from a Royals point of view, one, I think that the Royals had a nice trade deadline, but seeing what the other teams did at the deadline is another reason why I feel like they're real winners, because Cleveland, while they didn't have a fire sale, they did sell off some pieces. They did move Shane Bieber, and they were trying to move Stephen Kwan, but didn't get that done. Remember that Emmanuel Clase also got put on paid leave through the end of August for the gambling investigations going down. So now Shane Bieber is on the IL, so he hasn't technically contributed to the Guardians this year, but still a big piece to move on from. But that's kind of the small moves that were made in the American League Central. Going over to the Minnesota Twins, who kind of going into this season, it was, for me, make or break for the Twins and Rocco Baldelli, a team that had a good roster and was expected to compete in the AL Central. Some people had the Minnesota Twins winning the AL Central. The Twins got off to a really bad start. Then at one point, I think they won 13 or 14 games in a row, and they were right back in it. And then they've kind of faltered back. They're sitting 4th in the Central right now. But yeah, they got rid of everybody. They traded away 10 players from their active roster. So let's look at that. I think the big one is Carlos Correa going back to the Houston Astros. Now, if you remember, Carlos Correa signed a long-term deal with the Twins just 2 seasons ago. going back to Houston, where he won a World Series and was part of a big scandal and all those things. Houston's taking on $70 million of the remaining contract, and the Twins are retaining about $30 million of it. So Houston's taking on most of it. Traded Joan Duran to the Phillies, Harrison Bader to the Phillies, Brock Stewart to the Dodgers, Daniel Colombe to the Rangers, Will Castro to the Cubs, Griffin Jacks to the Rays, Louis Varland and Ty France, the Royals killer, to the Toronto Blue Jays. So yeah, they got rid of so many people and saved some money, and I don't really know what their plan is now. I'm assuming that Rocco Baldelli is going to be done after the end of the season, though if you're planning on a rebuild or whatever you're going to be doing, might as well keep him around if he wants to be there. Now, one interesting thing about the Minnesota Twins is they are for sale, and they've been for sale for about a year. Haven't had any deals go down, obviously, but it makes you wonder if this fire sale is part of that. I feel like we might have some information or details that'll come out about that in sometime this year, but it just felt like a weird thing to do. And I think getting rid of Carlos Correa was kind of the big standout move, because like I said, you had just signed him to a long-term deal not that long ago, and he still had a somewhat serviceable roster. Very weird scenario in Minnesota, but tying it back to the Royals, it's a win, because while the American League Central isn't full of powerhouses, it's full of at least 4 teams over the last couple of seasons that are at least competitive and in line for wild card spots. So take the Twins off of that, maybe see the Guardians fall back a little bit. The Royals are playing good baseball right now. They've won 4 series in a row, beat the Cubs, Guardians, Braves, and the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays are the best team in the league right now, and the Royals went on the road and took 2 out of 3, so that's huge. Now, looking at the standings right now, the Royals, at the time of recording this, are 56 and 57. They're 9.5 games out of the American League Central. They sit in 3rd in that division behind Cleveland. I think while Detroit wasn't playing great baseball straight out of the break, they've kind of gotten back on track and opened up a gap again in the Central. But looking at the more realistic place for the Royals' potential playoff hopes is the wild card. Royals are 4 games out of a wild card spot right now, behind 2 other teams, the Guardians, obviously, and the Texas Rangers. The Mariners hold the final wild card spot. They're actually tied with the Yankees there, 60 and 53. But just looking at those teams that I mentioned, the Mariners, Rangers, and Guardians, the Royals do have all 3 of those teams on their schedule still. They have 4 more games against the Guardians. All of those are on the road. They get to see the Rangers 4 more times. That series is at home. And they see the Mariners 3 more times, also at home. So they have 11 games here that are head-to-head against teams that are above them. Those are games that they need to take care of business in. They need to take 3 out of 4 against the Guardians. They need to take 3 out of 4 against the Rangers. They need to take 2 out of 3 against the Mariners. And those are going to be make or break on whether or not you make the postseason. And then in between those games, obviously you still have some tough series, and baseball is weird anyway, so it's kind of any given day as to what happens, but you still play the Tigers a bunch. You have to play the Phillies, play the Blue Jays again, but teams like the Angels and the A's and now the Twins, you still have the White Sox on your schedule. Go and take care of business in those games, and you can be part of October. I know I feel like a week ago I was doom and gloom about the Royals and then they're out of it, but they're playing really good baseball. Their offense has picked up a whole lot since the All-Star break, and they've won series against teams that I didn't really expect them to win. I mentioned the Braves, the Guardians, the Cubs, and the Blue Jays, all teams that I think are equal or better than the Kansas City Royals. They fared well against them. But I'll say it again, it is August, and we are 3 days away from the Kansas City Chiefs playing their first preseason game, and we are still heavily invested in what the Kansas City Royals are doing, so it is a fun time to be a fan. That is all I have for this week of This Is Baseball. Thank you for listening. I will see you next Wednesday.